All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome, and thanks for joining us. We're kicking off the Open Core Ventures Founder Spotlight Series, where we get to showcase the incredible people building the next generation of open core technologies. My name is Erica Lindberg, and I'm the head of content here at OCV. I am joined with Rich Aberman. Rich is a partner at OCV and primarily focused on working with our earliest stage companies from inception through commercialization and follow-on financing. Rich started his career as a founder out of undergrad. He went through YC and built and ran an early fintech company with his co-founder from inception to exit for about 10 years. They sold that company to JP Morgan Chase in one of YC's top exits to date. And he spent 2 years as a visiting partner at Y Combinator, and now he is here with us at OCV. Today, we're excited we get to shine a spotlight on Mermaid chart. Mermaid is a text-based diagramming and collaboration tool. It's built on top of the open source project mermaid.js. We are joined by Knut Sveidqvist, who is the CTO at Mermaid chart and the author of the original open source project. Knut, you started Mermaid chart with OCV in September 2022. And we also have Andrew Firestone, the CEO of Mermaid chart, with us today. And you joined Mermaid about a year after the company was started in August 2023. And you guys have had some really amazing growth in that time. When I first wrote the launch post, when you first launched Mermaid chart, the Mermaid project had about 50,000 stars on GitHub. Now it's up to 76,000. You raised a 7.5 million seed last year, and your Mermaid Live, the open source editor, is going to cross 1 million users this month. That's incredible.
Guys, what's it like hearing the 30-second summary of the past few years of your lives?
Time flies, I'd say. Gone so fast, but it's easy to get stuck in like the ongoing things that happen in the company. So it's nice to take a breath and just see what the path we're on. It's great.
The days are long and the years are short, right?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about how the project started?
Yeah, I was working at a large telecom company here in Sweden, and I was updating an architecture diagram, and I couldn't find the Visio file. This time everything was embedded in Word documents, etc. The telecom company was really good at documentation, but this time the Visio file was lost. So I thought it has to be a better way of doing this. And this was at the time where Markdown was coming. So I thought about getting something that was to diagrams what Markdown was for documents. And so I got the idea on the way back from work. And later that evening, when I settled down in the living room with my kids, I created the project, and they were watching The Little Mermaid, which is a true story, actually. So I struggled to find a good name, and okay, Mermaid, that's good. And
Erica, did you know that?
I did know that was.
I had no idea.
Yeah, a little bit fun.
Surely there were other tools out there. What did you find that was lacking in the existing toolkit that was like really the anchor of what you wanted to build?
I wanted something that could run in the browser, and that was easy to tie into your like commit flow when you important to have the code in connection with your code project. So you have the diagrams there and the markdown there and the code, so you don't have to context switch. So I basically built it for me and my team there at the telecom company.
Tell me a little bit more about the early usage. Sorry?
To facilitate efficient documentation, if you will.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the early usage and community. Like, when did this thing start to get used beyond on your immediate circle?
Yeah, so I published the first I just tried it at work, and then when it started to settle a bit, I added it to a blog, one of these developer JavaScript news blogs, and it really took off from there. So then the stars started to pling in GitHub. It ended up on this trending list, and suddenly there were 2,000 stars and some attention from the community. That was really fun to get that feedback. You put some work into it, and then you get the appreciation from people that use what you do. That was nice.
That's really validating. Was there ever a question for you as to whether you were going to build an open source or not, or was that just the...
Yeah, no, it was definitely meant to be open source from the start. I use so much open source, it's nice to contribute back. So it was a no-brainer.
So then I'll ask the alternative question. At what point did you think this could be something that's worth commercializing or building a company around?
Yeah, I really enjoyed working on the project. It's a fun area to do development around, diagramming and all that, visual and direct feedback, etc. So I started to dream about doing it full time and actually getting paid to do it. So at that time, I started to think about it, but it didn't really materialize. As small kids, they want to take the plunge at that point. I was contacted by venture capital in the past as well, before OCV, but it didn't really resonate at that point.
So tell me a little bit about your early flirtation with OCV. I think we reached out proactively. What were your initial impressions, concerns?
Yeah, so I mentioned I had some contact with other venture capital companies in the past, and so I was not unprepared for OCV, but it resonated in a much better way than the previous companies. Felt like everything seemed like a good counterpart. I got a really good impression. To the point, actually, I'm a pessimist sometimes. I thought it's a little bit too good to be true. So I was a little bit worried before I did my due diligence and checked out everything checked out.
Yeah, this obviously isn't rehearsed, but there's two potential bad words that I think folks in your position might be allergic to. One is like commercialization, and I think there's a lot to unpack there. And the other one is venture capital. And so we obviously are highly opinionated about both and look at ourselves as the good guys, but I think it is worth unpacking that a little bit. Like, it's interesting to me that the original spirit behind my question, at what point did you think that there was a commercialization opportunity here or that you could build a company around it? I was thinking in terms of some milestone of the project and the traction that it had made you think, oh, this could be big and I can make money on it. But actually it was the opposite. It's where you were in your personal journey of being passionate about this thing and wanting to spend more time on it, and having, being afforded the opportunity to do so. And I think that's a big part of kind of the argument that we're making, where commercial open source software is actually the harness around which you're able to support and produce more open source software.
That's also straight on the point, because what I felt a little bit when doing it on the weekends and evenings was that it wasn't really sustainable in the long run. You can easily get burned out. I almost got burned out at one point when I tried to keep a zero issue policy. And when you have like hundreds of thousands of users, that's not really feasible on your spare time. So having a company backing the project is a good way of doing the perhaps a little bit bigger things that needs to be done over time. It's been almost 10 years since we started Mermaid. And over that time, you get to the point where you need to do some refactoring, reduce some technical debt. And that's when you're very much helped by company backing.
Tell me a little bit more about why you don't put us in the category of typical VC. Like, what was it about our model or our pitch to you that made you feel comfortable getting married, so to speak, and casting your lot in with us versus raising traditional VC or bootstrapping?
That's a really difficult question, I must say, because it's more about the gut feeling, right? That you could tell from the start that you were not just after, of course, you're after monetization and getting profitability, but I sensed that there was something more there. And over the years we've been working together, my worst fears had not materialized. Let's put it that way. Yeah, you can always make this scary venture capital kind of ghost, and that's not at all how it has been. It's been more like we've been working together to get this going.
So we'll do another one of these in 10 years, and we'll need to confirm that your worst years have still not been realized.
Yeah.
And turning to you, so, you did not grow up with Mermaid charts. You weren't part of the original open source community. And so I'm curious to hear what your initial reaction was when Mel, for those of you who don't know, Mel is our head of talent and recruiting, when she reached out to you with this kind of crazy model and exciting open source project.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my background, come from a family of entrepreneurs, been building companies since I was young, been part of a bunch of startups, was on the venture side as well. And I was at an unusual venture fund that did a lot of work building venture studios, like a very meta Silicon Valley concept of venture studio of venture studios. And so I got to see a lot of this kind of model. So I knew it, relatively well. It was actually something that I was particularly interested in because I had just come off a startup, really good experience, but not a great outcome. And so what I was looking for was I was either going to start something from scratch and was looking at a bunch of different options for that, or I was looking for something that was a little bit of a hybrid. I was about to get married and needed an income. And so this was an interesting balance where I could come in and join a team and work with something that already had some traction. And when I first met Mel, she said, look, we've got 3 companies that need a CEO. Which one are you interested in? And she described each one of them. And candidly, I didn't have a background in visual collaboration software, but the way that she talked about the different opportunities, Mermaid was the most interesting for kind of my background and skill set. And then once I met Knut, and maybe Knut can talk a little bit about the long questionnaires that I put him through and all the co-founder alignment work that we did to make sure that we were going to have a good relationship, had a good feeling, but also to make sure we were aligned on what we were trying to accomplish, and turned out to be a really good fit.
Tell me a little bit more about that flirtation dating period. Like, how long did it last? How many times did you guys meet beforehand? Did you have a trial period? I wasn't here at the time, so.
Yeah, I think we met, correct me if I'm wrong, Knut, but I think we met maybe 4 times, 3 or 4 times. I met Mel, I met Betty, and then I met Knut a couple of times, and I spoke with Sid, and then Knut and I spent some more time together. But I had done Antler. I don't know if you're familiar with Antler, but they have a kind of co-founder questionnaire. It's basically like a founder program. You go with 100 people, they select a cohort of 100 people, and you try to find a co-founder. And then if you find a co-founder and have a company, then they'll fund it. It's a 3-month program. And so they have this whole structure around matching relationships and matching people. And so I adapted that. I've done it with about 50 people. So I had a pretty good understanding of if somebody is going to work well with me or not. And so I put Knut through that kind of adapted list of 80 questions. And we spent, I don't know, 4 hours or something over a couple sessions going through it. And I think it was Knut and I both had the same general disposition. Obviously, we're worlds away in terms of where we live and our kind of general backgrounds. But I think being smart, ambitious, but also really kind and thoughtful, I think really aligned with kind of what I wanted. And I also, there's so much transactional kind of relationships in startups. And I think the thing that was encouraging about Knut and the whole project is that this has already been around for 8 years, right? So you have so much for the business. There's so much data about, what works and what doesn't, but also from a personal perspective, you don't really question the commitment. And you really know, Knut was showing us on our on-site, he's like, I'm going to do this, I'm never going to retire and I'm going to do this forever. And I'm that same kind of person. If I'm in 2000%, and it can be a little bit scary for some people, I'm all in, right? And he's exactly the same way. And that I think is really important at this stage in a company.
So Knut, I'd be curious
That
to
was
hear.
really, really nice when Andrew came aboard as well, because up to that point, it's been, I mean, there were more people, but I felt that I had to drive everything. It's all on my shoulders, all the problems. So I had someone to share that with, and that was really nice. It still is nice. And it's also when I mean, me and Andrew, we don't always agree on everything, but we always have that, the core, the foundation, and that makes, we want the same thing, and it's very easy to get forward, always.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear your first impressions. You're living in the open source world, full-time engineer, and you recently got funded by OCV, and we put in a polished Silicon Valley multi-time founder in front of you. And my initial concern would be there's going to be a bit of a culture clash here. Like the optics are very different. And yet you two have seemed to have a really productive relationship. And I'm curious, like, A, what was your initial impression? And B, is there anything that we can learn from what has made you guys click so well as we think about future pairings?
Yeah, that first impression is easier because those questions were really good. So because of them, it was really, I shouldn't say easy, but really helped lifting the lid on the person, Andrew, because it's important to have the same foundation, in the sense that if you want the same things, not just for the company, but also in how you act and how you deal with other people, etc., then it gets so much easier with all the small details you have to decide together.
This may be a controversial take, and I say this as somebody that started my startup with my best friend and ran that company with him for 10 years from inception to exit. And I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary with my wife. So I have my like professional ride or die, and I have my like deep soulmate. And yet, despite both of those formative experiences, like the two central relationships in my life, they've probably made me believe more in arranged marriages than I would have before. I think there's like a baseline level of compatibility and shared values that you need, but I don't think most of that is rocket science. And I think it's a fairly narrow set of commonalities that you need. But on top of that, in any 10-year journey, the primary thing that matters is a commitment to make it work and putting in work to do so. And I think that's true both in professional relationships and in personal ones.
I agree. And that ability that we both have, I think, is to give and take. So Andrew doesn't have to have it his way all the time. And I don't have to have my way either all the time. So when both people yield sometimes and stand the ground sometimes, then it goes by automation almost.
Andy, it's funny, when I asked you about what your initial impressions of the model were and what got you excited about Mermaid, you had spent a little bit of time talking about previous experiences with like non-traditional venture models and Studio S arrangements, but you went very quickly into the three companies that were put in front of you and what made Mermaid special. I had a conversation with another founder from OCV. I asked him the same question, and his response was, I just didn't care about the model. He's like, I understood that I was going to join something that was a little bit further along. So there was some raw material there that I could play with. There was a little bit less risk for him personally because of the compensation, but all he wanted to get to was, what are the companies? And is there a company that's doing something or has a trajectory that I could just get really excited about and want to grab onto? And I'm curious for you, like how much of it was the model and more abstract opportunity to be a founder again and to join something that already had some foundational value versus something specific that you saw in Mermaid or Knut that made you say, this is the prize?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of things that kind of came together. I think from a model perspective, it was the most non-founder thing I would ever consider. Right. So it was on the edge of like, I can't ever imagine taking a job, right? That's my disposition. So when it was like, okay, this is a job, but you're a founder, to me, that was like against my DNA in some sort of a way. So the model was like just right on the edge of what would make sense for me personally. Also, there was some practical element of having a little bit of income, which is nice. I didn't want to go start from scratch after I just had done that again, but was open-minded to it. But to me, the thing that was really about the relationships, working with Knut, working with OCV, working with Sid. Those were really important to me because I think that without good relationships, it's just like my time is just worth more than money. So if I'm going to be doing this, I want to actually be able to enjoy it and actually be able to succeed and have the right kind of people around me. And then from the company perspective, Mermaid, when I joined it, it had traction and there were things happening, but like the amount of revenue that they had, the amount of users, I didn't know any of that information. And I also didn't know that much about diagramming. But I think that the thing that was exciting to me is that from a timing perspective, I felt like Mermaid was sitting in the right place at the right time to capture a huge opportunity. And there were so many adjacencies to the core that would be really fun to jump into, right? So each one of the diagram types that Mermaid has could be its own $100 million revenue business, right? And so having the distribution of the open source project, having all the traction and the data to be able to process, and then all the fun business problems and things that you can solve on top of that very broad platform, to me, those are the types of problems that I like to solve from a product and growth perspective. And so it just suited what I knew that I would be good at, on top of being the right kind of people to do it with.
That's really illuminating. And I want to dig into the traction story itself and kind of understand what that trajectory looked like, where you got your first customers, the early hypotheses that you had. Before we go there, a couple other questions or insights that I want to dig into. You kind of nailed it with our model being right on the edge. The classic bell curve me where you have like the mid-wit in the center and then the half-wit and the ninja. And there's a famous one for venture capital where on both ends of the spectrum, the insight is founders are all that matter. It's all about the founders. And in the mid-wit, you have like TAM and defensibility and SOM and all that stuff. And I think the biggest potential challenge for our model is we need great founders. And yet we're sourcing founders. And that's typically not where great founders are found. Great founders raise their hand and are starting companies because they can't help themselves than to start companies. And that's a big reason why I think we're adverse to calling ourselves a studio, because a studio implies that this is our baby, our idea, our project, and we need to hire people to execute it. And yet there are elements to that for sure. And so I think you nailed it, where we have to push the limit as far as we can to de-risk this thing as much as possible and give ourselves the widest net imaginable to bring on and recruit great people. But they still have to fundamentally feel like founders. And they have to have that mentality and that DNA. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about what your transition looked like from a passion project, open source author and maintainer to a CTO of a venture-backed company?
Yeah, that was really rewarding, I must say. It was super fun. In the past, I've been working in various roles in the IT industry. I've been a project manager, I've been product owner, I've been development manager, etc., etc. Now I could take all that and put it in one role and just run with it. I felt I had the tools already in place and just to start building. And that was also really good with OCV, because if you start something from scratch by yourself, you need to handle accounting, all those administration things. I could avoid that and just focus on building the best product to get into the seed stage. To show
We're going a little bit in the narrative here, Erica, so you'll have to forgive me, but I'm curious, what did your first 3 months look like? So we wrote the $2 million check. you're now full-time on this thing. It's still just you. Did you hire Andy? How long until you joined from the point that the company was launched?
I think it was like 8 months.
8 months. Okay. So Knut, what happened in that 8 months?
Yeah. So first I started looking in the open source project to get people to come aboard, and one of the main developers joined, Siddharth, and he and I started building the platform. So the first month or first weeks was to get the initial idea of what we're supposed to build, what will we charge for, if you will, and then making sure that we get something out quickly. Important to get something in front of the customers as soon as possible, so you get the first initial feedback and some knowledge if there's something there. Is this something anyone will be willing to pay for? And to get that early, because if it's not, then you still have the chance to adjust before the first check runs out, right? So we really pushed to get the first version out. And then we had a bit of luck as well, because ChatGPT came, and with ChatGPT came the ability to generate diagrams using LLMs. And we started to add that, so that we got the first, when ChatGPT plugins came. It's not called plugins now, it's called GPTs. But when they launched, it was plugins, getting that out there to get some traffic from that. So then things started to come together. But I actually nagged a little bit at OCV about the CEO, because I know that I'm good at building things, but having someone to, for instance, setting the pricing, that's hard, I think. I don't care. Of course, I care about the pricing, but it's not something that excites me so much. I just want to have a price. And that's an example of a business decision that I'm not the best equipped to handle. I can deal with the building, but pushing it forward, I felt that I wanted some help. So I kept nagging OCV, and then they come up with a lot of candidates, but Andrew among them, of course.
Cutscene. 8 months go by. Andy joins. Andy, what's the shape of this thing? One narrative is Knut starts on day one. He talks to a whole bunch of users, forms a very well-refined thesis on where the commercialization opportunity is, builds a solid foundation of that commercial product, and the thing is taking off. The other narrative is, every startup I've ever seen, 8 months in, there's some things that are working, some things that aren't. It's hard to tell the difference between the two. There's some team, I don't even know what the team looked like when you joined. So maybe just give us a sense. We call it the ship meeting. It's like you sign on or you make your hire, and then the next day, like all the skeletons come out of the closet. So what did you see called day 2 of your tenure as CEO of Mermaid?
It was interesting. I thought I had a pretty good idea of what it would be like, but it was definitely different. The first thing I did was look at the Stripe dashboard. I was like, okay, how much revenue is this company actually making? And it was basically none. I was like, okay, that's too bad. And then the second thing that I looked at was how much money do we have in the bank? Because I also didn't get that figure, and it was way more than I expected. It was way more than I had been told passively in the process. And so I was, okay, this is a very interesting setup. And then I started using the product, and the kind of monetization aspect of it hadn't really been fleshed out. So like when you would run out of diagrams, for example, on the free tier, it just would stop working. And there was no pathway to go and create a paid account. And so I was like, okay, so I just started by just making lists of, okay, here's some things that we can do with the current thing that we have to start making a little bit more money from it. But I spent the first, 6 to 8 weeks just being a sponge, because the thing that we had to figure out was we're going towards the end of the year. The traction for the open source project was really positive, and it was going up without us investing in it. But we needed to raise a seed round kind of at some point. And so about 3 months in, I started fundraising, and so it was a really interesting
Well, sorry,
transition.
I want to hear about the fundraising story, but
Yeah.
I mean, name numbers. Like when you joined, how much cash was in the bank? How many FTEs were there? What was your burn? I know you probably don't know it off the top of your head.
Yeah. I
Your
think,
rough-
there were 4 full-time, and then, I think we did like $2,500 in revenue the month that I joined, if I remember correctly, something like that. It was like way more than it was the month before, which was basically zero. But it was like very, very small
infinite month over
numbers.
month growth. And you had like over $1 million in the bank at that point.
Yeah, I think we had 11 months of runway, something like that.
So what gave you like, I don't know, you joined, you spent 6 to 8 weeks just kind of absorbing and learning, asking a bunch of questions. And then like 4 weeks later, you're out fundraising. What gave you the confidence and conviction and ability to raise? Like walk me through that thought process.
Yeah, it was an interesting calculation. Basically, the Knut and team had done all the things that are no fun, right? Building a startup, right? So they built the payment system, they built the kind of account system, they had the database structure, like they had all the things that you need to be able to make this work. And we had just gotten the GPT out, and there was a bunch of press buzzing around that, and the whole kind of GPT wave was coming and pushing us forward. It was a major tailwind. And so to me, it was like either we fundraise at the end of the year in this kind of end of year fundraising window, or we fundraise at the beginning of the year. We could wait, but if we wait, we only have 5 months of runway based on the team that we were putting together, right? So because we're not going to fundraise in December, right, or the beginning of January. So it's like we could start January 15th at the earliest, and then we have kind of 5 months of runway, and it's okay, that's enough, but that's cutting it a little bit close. And it's also not playing offense, it's playing defense. Or we could fundraise almost immediately and we'd have 8 months of runway. And if we nail it, we're going to fly forward and really be able to play offense in the new year. And I'd started to understand, okay, so here's who's using the product, here's how it's being used, here's the different kind of applications, here's how we could expand on that. And so we had a vision coming together, even though looking back now, we were still doing the same thing, but we had no idea in terms of what we were actually going to be able to build this into. Like today, I feel like the sky's the limit. Then I was like, I'm just like searching for, is there that thing that's going to really make this take off? And we weren't really 100% sure.
What was the big vision that you pitched? What was, you raised, you could share the details of your raise. I think it's public.
Yeah.
It was great. It was a really compelling seed round, like top seed round. And I think your backgrounds, the traction of the open source project itself, the closed source, large incumbents, I think are nice raw material for investors.
Mm-hmm.
But there also had to be like a vision that you pitched of what this thing was going to be long term. And I'd be curious a bit more about that.
I'll be honest, the vision changed probably 5 times during the fundraise. And I fell right on my face when we went out to market because we had, Sid being involved, the open source project, Knut being the founder, having my background coming in and being able to scale it. We had a lot of things that sounded good from a venture perspective that would get us a meeting. So we met with Sequoia and everybody else day one, which usually doesn't happen. And I tried to schedule the meetings with the funds that maybe didn't want to meet or they're more friendly, like the ones that weren't ideal targets up front so that we could learn. And then by the time we get to the big dogs, we were able to nail the pitch. But truthfully, I took over 300 meetings to get this fundraise done. And like before the end of the year, we had no capital actually committed. So I started fundraising in October. 2 months later, no capital committed, and a lot of my network utilized by that point. So it was getting a little bit bleak, but we had a lot of people interested, and the pitch was starting to work. And Microsoft, who ended up participating in the round, they had committed to investing. And so once I had gotten that and gotten the story a little bit more ironed out, all of a sudden it went from like a 5% close rate to an 80% close rate overnight. And we were trying to raise 3 million. We ended up getting over 9 million in commitments, and then reducing that down to 7.5 because we didn't need that much capital. But the 7.5 that we raised, all of that happened in about 3 weeks. And the other 4.5 months of the fundraise was just me, pitching it, failing forward. But going back to your question on the pitch itself, it started as, okay, we've got this open source thing and we can monetize it, right? There's a clear path to kind of monetization, and AI is a tailwind. That was the thing. And in the future, you could go build a whole workflow engine and all these other things off the back of Mermaid. I still didn't really understand how that would work when I first joined. And then as we got through the process, the way that Microsoft got excited, that was a cold LinkedIn message that got us that key investor. I was reaching out, I was playing on every potential source of meetings, and them and I think a couple others were all cold outbound, which I think works really well if you do it.
I'm terrified now to ask my next question, because what you just said would be so contrary to the advice that I would say.
Yeah. We had a meeting with Sid recently where one of the founders was like, should I do cold outbound? Sid, no, don't ever do cold outbound. That's ridiculous. And I was like, wait a second, but just so you know, that's how we closed our whole funding round, was cold outbound. And I don't think you need a warm intro. I don't know if that's contrarian, but I just don't think that. I think if you put together a really good cold outreach, the investor reads all their emails, right? And if you land it in their inbox and it's good, it should work.
I look forward to digging into your experience offline and updating my algorithm for advice that I give founders in the future. But maybe I'll ask directly, what advice would you give an OCV company raising their first round of financing after OCV and going through the similar fundraising process to what you did? And I know there's like general fundraising advice, but clearly there's like challenges and opportunities for OCV companies specifically. And I'm wondering if there's like any nuggets you picked up along the way that we should make sure to capture for posterity.
Yeah, I've spoken to, I think, every CEO that is currently raising at OCV, but to me, like, process is super critical. So like putting the right process in place. I think I shared a bit about my process and some of the cold outbound that I did in Slack. So I think you guys have that. I also shared the database that I put together of investors for that outbound. I think the thing that I've done a good job of in my career is keeping the relationships with people that I've pitched previously. So I've raised 5 rounds of venture in the last 6 years, including a couple of years off. It's, if you keep those relationships, multiply, right? So I sent 1 email and got 60 introductions to the people that I pitched previously, and that was really productive. But from an OCV's perspective, I think it's figuring out the narrative. And in my case, it was figuring out the narrative specifically related to outbound to get meetings, and using the best parts of OCV, which are really Sid and the open source project, and figuring out how to represent those honestly, but productively, and using those as a way to get meetings, and understanding the potential pitfalls before you encountered them. The cap table is always going to be a concern coming out of a venture studio company. The ability to monetize an open source project is something that VCs are deeply skeptical of, right? We still even hear that today, even though we've got 1,000 paying users. And so there's some things that are inherent to the structure. There's advantages and there's disadvantages. And I think figuring out how to play to the advantages and mitigate the disadvantages, I think, is the kind of key to doing well. And then there's all the basic fundraising advice, but I'm sure you guys have plenty of that.
Knut, we're going to end with a question for you. What's on the horizon for Mermaid Chart from a product perspective? And I always debate what the right timeline is for this question. So somewhere between 6 months and 6 years, what should we get really excited to see come out of the product shop?
Wow. Yeah, I think we will see not just the editor and making diagrams, but also us moving into automation and making our services available for other platforms on a B2B kind of business. So we'll continue with what we're doing, but I think we'll have another leg to stand on.
I'm excited to see B2B workflow automation out of Mermaid Charts. I think it all starts with the diagramming. And I feel like the technology's reached a point now where that can easily translate into directions for RPA. So, guys, thank you so much for the time. It's super exciting to see this trajectory that you're on. It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you guys, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks,
Okay.
everybody. for joining.
Thanks.